It was 3:17 a.m., and the world's most famous woman was speeding through Los Angeles in a borrowed coat, desperately seeking a place where the spotlight couldn't reach. She found that fragile sanctuary in the silent, sterile corridor of a children's hospital, a place where a single, exhausted nurse held a secret tragedy so vast it instantly shattered Marilyn's carefully constructed world. The hour was a silent betrayal. Inside the apartment, she was just Norma Jean, and she was gripped by a quiet, agonizing fear that fame could no longer touch. The weight of her public life, the expectations, the demands, the constant performance had become a physical thing, pressing down on her chest until she could barely draw breath. She had everything, yet possessed nothing real. She had recently spent a week trying to reconcile the smiling image on the posters with the quiet despair in her own heart. Tonight, she needed to vanish. She chose the disguise carefully, meticulously stripping away the famous self. The platinum wig came off, replaced by a simple, dark brown one, pulled low over her forehead. She draped a thick, oversized wool coat, one she had borrowed from a wardrobe assistant, over her delicate frame and put on the largest, darkest pair of sunglasses she could find. It was armor against her own fame. Marilyn slipped out the back entrance, a ghost in her own life, and slid into a borrowed, anonymous Lincoln Continental. She didn't head for a party or a rendezvous. She drove toward the one place she knew the glare of Hollywood never reached, determined only to be a shadow. As the car cruised down the deserted boulevards, she watched the glittering city shrink in her rearview mirror. She drove east, away from the mansions and the manicured lawns, toward a neighborhood that looked worn and real, smelling faintly of asphalt and necessity. The destination she had chosen was modest, almost invisible, the West Side Children's Hospital. She felt a profound, almost spiritual need to be where suffering was real, tangible, and not just the manufactured drama of a film set. She needed the simple, humbling perspective found in a place where people dealt with fundamental, unscripted truths. She pulled the car into the back alley, the engine ticking quietly as it cooled. She had arrived at the only place where she felt the paralyzing weight of her own life could lift, if only for a few moments of perfect invisibility. She adjusted the heavy coat and slid the sunglasses farther up her nose. This was her refuge, the quiet eye in the storm of her life. She was stepping into the darkness, hoping to find a small, forgotten corner of light. Marilyn pulled the borrowed Lincoln Continental into the back alley of the modest West Side Children's Hospital, an institution so unfashionable, so divorced from the glittering world she inhabited, that it offered her the only genuine privacy she knew. It was here, in the cold, unglamorous periphery of Hollywood, that she felt the crushing weight of her own life lift slightly. The back door required a gentle push, and it opened onto a narrow linoleum corridor that smelled faintly of sterile cleanliness. She walked slowly, quietly, her heels making no sound on the worn floor. She was looking for the profound quiet of people enduring hardship with dignity. This wasn't a charity stop, it was a sanctuary. Months earlier, she had discreetly visited on behalf of a friend, and she had witnessed something unforgettable, a simple, necessary love that had resonated deeply with her. She remembered thinking then that the greatest beauty wasn't found in a studio lens, but in the exhaustion of a parent who simply refused to quit. She paused by the reception desk. It was empty, manned only by a single blinking computer screen. Beyond the desk, the main hallway stretched out, a silent artery leading to rooms where tiny battles for health and recovery were being fought. She continued her slow, deliberate journey, passing walls adorned with cheerful, childlike drawings. From down the hall, she heard the low, mournful sound of a baby crying, a lonely sound that cut through the silence. She saw a single, worn teddy bear resting against the wall, clearly left behind by a parent too weary to carry anything more. This environment of acute vulnerability was a powerful anesthetic for the ache in her soul. Marilyn remembered the feeling of being small, insignificant, and in need of saving. Unlike the manufactured dramas on sound stages, the struggles here were real, unscripted, and heartbreakingly human. Here, money couldn't buy a quick fix, and fame held no sway. She needed that humbling perspective. She stopped at the entrance to a small, brightly lit waiting area, a circle of vinyl chairs surrounding a stack of old magazines. She planned to simply sit and watch the slow, quiet ballet of a hospital at rest. She finally allowed herself a sigh, the small, quiet sound swallowed by the massive, sleeping building. She was just about to step inside when she heard a door click softly down the hall and a lone figure emerge from a patient's room. The hallway was dark, illuminated only by the faint red glow of exit signs, when a weary, silent figure emerged from a room. She was Nurse Clara Hernandez, the guardian of the 3 a.m. shift, and she moved with the quiet focus of a true professional. In her arms, she held a frightened toddler, gently stroking the child's back while whispering a hushed, steady song. Clara moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who has perfected the art of invisible, necessary service. Her uniform was crisp but slightly rumpled, the honest wear of a long night spent fighting for tiny lives. Her tired eyes had seen far, too much worry and far too little sleep. Yet she exuded an aura of total quiet competence. She was essential. To Marilyn, watching from the shadows, Clara represented a reality that was humbling and intensely desirable, a life dedicated to actual, palpable good. The contrast between the icon built on desire and the nurse built on duty was the most compelling performance Marilyn had ever witnessed. After placing the toddler back in the crib and checking the chart, Clara paused by the nursing station, leaning against the counter for just a moment, a subtle sway indicating the deep exhaustion that settled in the quietest hours. She pulled a worn paperback from her pocket, not to read, but simply to hold a small tether to her own life. Marilyn watched, absolutely captivated. She recognized the look on Clara's face, the quiet determination that masked profound struggle. It was the face of a fighter who fought not for fame, but for the breath of a child she had promised to protect. Marilyn compared the constant, deafening neediness of her own life, the agents, the directors, the photographers, to the silent, constant needs of the children Clara tended. Clara wasn't performing. She was simply doing. All Marilyn's fame seemed brittle and cheap next to the solid, unshakable worth of this woman's purpose. Clara turned and began to walk slowly down the corridor, heading towards the waiting area where Marilyn stood. Marilyn, paralyzed by the genuine emotion flooding her, could not move. She watched as Clara briefly stopped at a closed door, pressing her ear lightly against the wood, listening for a moment before nodding and moving on. It was a gesture of profound tenderness, a silent assurance that she was present. Clara was almost upon her, a woman whose focus was strictly on the essential, and Marilyn knew her anonymity was about to meet the raw necessity of the night shift. Marilyn, fumbling in her coat for a handkerchief, a small, unnecessary nervousness betraying her calm, walked directly into Clara. The nurse, her eyes red-rimmed and distant, had just emerged from a palliative care room, the weight of a quiet, inevitable loss heavy on her soul. The collision was a soft, inevitable crash between two people carrying too much sorrow. Clara murmured a tired apology, her focus already on the pain she had just witnessed. But as she raised her eyes to meet the dark, oversized sunglasses, she stopped dead. The dark wig was convincing, the heavy coat bulky, but the precise symmetry of that face, and the specific, unforgettable luminosity of the eyes peering out from behind the lenses were impossible to mistake. The sight of Marilyn Monroe, the impossible image of glamour, standing in the back hallway of a struggling children's hospital at 3 a.m, instantly jolted Clara out of her own immediate distress. It was as though a flashbulb had gone off in the darkness, momentarily dispelling the shadow of her own personal grief. For a moment the air was suspended. Marilyn braced herself for the startled gasp, the whispered intrusion of fame. But Nurse Clara Hernandez did not react like a fan. She saw not the smiling icon, but a woman standing too close to the edge seeking refuge. In her tired eyes there was only quiet acknowledgement, not curiosity. "I'm sorry," Marilyn whispered, her voice rough, the famous voice muted by the hour and the anxiety. Clara only shook her head gently. "It's all right," she replied, her voice soft but firm, a tone usually reserved for soothing frightened children. That simple, neutral response was more disarming than any fanfare could have been. It was the first time in years Marilyn felt truly seen. Without another word, Marilyn retreated 2 paces and settled herself onto one of the faded vinyl chairs in the small, empty waiting area nearby, dropping her guard entirely. Clara looked at the seated figure, confirming the reality of the strange encounter. Then, without fanfare, she treated Marilyn's presence not as an extraordinary celebrity moment, but as another weary visitor seeking comfort. The silence returned, now charged with a powerful intimacy. The two women, separated by oceans of fame and fortune, were suddenly connected by the shared, deep quiet of the 3 a.m. shift. Marilyn felt a knot of tension loosen in her shoulders, realizing that the night had a greater purpose for her than simple rest. After 20 minutes of absolute shared silence, Clara pushed back from the nursing station. She walked slowly to the waiting area, too tired to stand another moment, and sat down on a chair across from the silent, famous figure. The simple gravity of her exhaustion pulled the truth from her like gravity, a story meant for no one, yet offered to Marilyn alone. She didn't look at Marilyn when she spoke. She looked at the scuffed floor, her hands folded over a chart. "This is a good place," Clara began, her voice a low rasp. "It's honest. It's hard, but it's honest work." She paused, then gave a small, defeated shake of her head. "But it doesn't pay for miracles." It was not a request for help, only a simple, aching statement of fact, the kind of truth you tell to yourself in the dark. Marilyn felt a terrible tightening in her throat. Clara, sensing a non-judgmental presence, continued to talk, releasing the enormous burden she carried. She spoke of her son, Thomas, 10 years old, a boy with eyes like deep pools and a smile that could light up a ward. She told the silent woman that Thomas had a rare, progressive, neurological condition. It was a disorder that was slowly, inevitably, robbing him of his ability to move, to play, to be a boy. He can no longer hold his crayon to finish his colorful drawings, and lately, he asks why his legs don't want to play with the other boys. That question, posed by an innocent child, had been tearing Clara apart for months. The struggle wasn't just physical, it was financial. Clara recounted years of juggling shifts, of the hospital bills that arrived daily, stacked higher than any Christmas presents. The core hope lay with a specific specialist thousands of miles away in Boston, a doctor whose program was pioneering but prohibitively expensive. "We sold the house last year," Clara admitted, the words barely audible. She spoke of her husband leaving when the diagnosis became clear. He simply couldn't handle the fear and the unrelenting pressure. So now it was just Clara and Thomas. Their entire life was a quiet, desperate vigil centered on the faint possibility of reaching Boston. The gap between what Thomas needed and what Clara could provide was a widening chasm. "I just need 1 more year," Clara whispered, finally looking up. 1 year of specialized care. That's all the doctor said he needs to stabilize the progression. She paused, then gave a tiny, dignified shrug. "But you keep going because you have to, that's all. You show up for the night shift and you hold your child's hand when you get home." The emotional stakes were now unbearably high, anchored in the simple, desperate love of a mother and her son. We have reached the emotional core of this story, where Clara's true sacrifice is laid bare. We want to know, what is the greatest sacrifice you ever made for someone you love? Drop a comment below and share your story with us. Clara finished her story not with a plea, but with a statement of resigned endurance. You keep going because you have to. That's all. It was this quiet dignity, this utter lack of demanding help, that finally shattered Marilyn's composure and broke her heart. In that small, sterile waiting room, the icon saw the worthlessness of her fame compared to the struggle of this one good woman. Marilyn realized her fame meant nothing if it couldn't alleviate the genuine, agonizing burden carried by Clara. She pulled off the dark sunglasses, the famous blue eyes now glistening with unscripted, raw tears. She stood up abruptly, the movement surprising Clara, and then, in an act of powerful humility, she knelt beside the nurse's chair. Eye level with Clara, the icon was gone, replaced by Norma Jean. She reached out and gently placed her hand over Clara's rough working hands. For a split second, Marilyn looked down and saw her reflection in the highly polished linoleum floor, the blurred image of the world's desire kneeling before true, selfless purpose. The contrast, she knew, was the deepest truth she had ever faced. This profound image galvanized her resolve. "You said you just need 1 year," Marilyn whispered, her voice husky and sincere. 1 year to get him stable, 1 year in Boston. She looked directly into Clara's weary eyes. The tears now streamed down Marilyn's face. "I have money," Marilyn stated simply, without glamour or apology. "Too much of it. It doesn't do anything for me except make me feel alone. But for you, for Tomas, it could be a sword." She squeezed Clara's hand and made the single impossible promise, the one that would define her brief visit and remain a sacred secret for years to come. "Clara, you will see Tomas walk into that clinic in Boston, I promise. Every single penny, every arrangement. You worry about Tomas's heart, I will worry about the travel and the debt. This is not charity. This is an honor." Clara tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She could only stare at the legendary woman kneeling before her, seeing the raw, resolute purpose radiating from her. Marilyn's promise was a desperate lifeline thrown by a woman finding salvation in another person's need. For Marilyn, the act of giving her wealth away to solve Clara's impossible problem was more restorative than any therapy session. For those fleeting, profound seconds, she wasn't a commodity. She was a force for good. Marilyn stood up, her tears quickly wiped, but something fundamental had shifted inside her. She had a mission. She knew her presence now was a liability, and she had to disappear before the sun rose and the world found out that their glamorous icon had been brought to her knees by a nurse's simple truth. If this story of profound secret kindness touches your heart, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded that the most important acts are often the most anonymous. The true meaning of fame is how you use it to lift up those who are struggling in silence. Clara sat stunned, watching the magnificent yet fragile woman replace her sunglasses and pull the collar of the heavy coat back up. The legend was sealing herself off again, but the promise she had left hanging in the air was too real, too powerful to ignore. Marilyn left as abruptly as she had arrived, a silent dark blur that melted back into the 3 a.m. blackness. She was already gone, her footsteps quick and decisive, before Clara could fully process the impossible words that had been spoken in the quiet of the night. Clara was stunned, but the crushing need to save Tomas allowed no room for doubt or lengthy rumination. The choice was not between belief and disbelief. It was between hope and utter surrender, and Clara was a fighter by nature. She pushed herself to her feet, her legs shaky, and walked quickly to the vinyl chair where Marilyn had been sitting. The tears on her cheeks were real, hot evidence that the encounter had been agonizingly sincere. On the cushion, she found 2 small, tangible items. One was a beautiful, slender gold pen, personalized with a delicate engraving of 3 initials, NJD, Norma Jean DiMaggio. The sight of the initials linking the woman to her legendary past sent a shiver down Clara's spine. This was real. The second item was a folded cocktail napkin. Clara unfolded it with trembling hands. Inside, Marilyn had written 3 lines in a quick, elegant script. It wasn't a check, which Clara might have dismissed as a fever dream. It was a cryptic, short instruction. Call my friend's office at 9 a.m., ask for Mrs. Green. Mention the DiMaggio suite at the Waldorf. Tell her you need to save a boy. Clara stared at the napkin. The DiMaggio suite? She was an ordinary, tired nurse. She didn't call friends' offices in the morning, much less reference luxury suites in famous New York hotels. Yet, the anguish in Marilyn's eyes, the initials on the pen, and the agonizing truth of Tomas's need anchored her to the moment. This wasn't a celebrity joke. This was a woman using the only tool she possessed, her connections and her anonymity, to make good on a vow. She looked toward the hallway. The icon had performed the ultimate vanishing act, shedding her fame to offer a profound, anonymous rescue. She hadn't left a paper trail or a name, only a secret pathway. Clara understood the implicit instruction. The help would come, but it would come under the cover of silence. The silent promise weighed more than any gold. The challenge wasn't just to make the call, it was to confront the possibility that her deepest, most desperate prayer had been answered by the most unlikely messenger imaginable. Clara clutched the pen and the napkin tightly. The cold, sterile hallway was beginning to lighten with the pale gray promise of dawn. Her fear was now replaced by a terrifying, exhilarating hope, and she walked to the payphone, dialing with a trembling, resolute hand. The very next morning, at precisely 9 o'clock, Clara made the call. She asked for Mrs. Green, mentioned the DiMaggio suite, and whispered the desperate code, "I need to save a boy." There were no pleasantries, no questions about who she was, only professional, immediate action. A prestigious, anonymous law firm contacted Clara minutes later. The lawyer, Mrs. Green, skipped the pleasantries and went straight to the logistics. The firm, acting on behalf of an anonymous private trust, had already settled the first installment of the hospital debt. The effect on Clara was immediate and overwhelming. The 6-year burden of financial worry, the constant, crushing anxiety, simply evaporated. She collapsed into the chair behind her desk as tears of profound, life-altering relief streamed down her face. It was the moment the years of desperate struggle, the sleepless nights, and the countless double shifts were finally validated. The promise had not been an illusion. The firm had one ironclad condition. The donor's identity must remain completely protected. Every transaction, every payment would be routed through a blind trust established in Zurich. This was Marilyn's most powerful act of self-effacement, ensuring her kindness was pure and unburdened by publicity. Later that afternoon, a discreet package arrived for Tomas. It contained a single powerful item, a baseball, perfectly preserved, bearing the crisp, unmistakable signature of Joe DiMaggio. There was no card, no explanation, only the silent symbolism of the gift. The item was worth a fortune, but its true value was the unspoken confirmation. The woman in the borrowed coat had kept her sacred word. Clara rushed home and sat Tomas down. She showed him the baseball, telling him a beautiful, simple truth. An angel heard our prayer, darling, and now we are going to Boston. Tomas's eyes went wide with innocent delight, not because of the money, but because he knew they were going on an adventure, and his mother was finally smiling. He held the ball tightly, a small, tangible piece of hope. The weeks that followed were a blur of miraculous logistics. A first-class flight to Boston was booked, including a private car service to manage Tomas's transportation comfortably. The financial anxiety was replaced by a quiet, joyful anticipation. The impossible miracle was now unfolding, smooth and serene, exactly as Marilyn had planned it in her chaotic, beautiful mind. This emotional, life-changing payoff is exactly what our audience craves. If this story of secret kindness touched your heart, hit that subscribe button now and join us for more incredible tales of the human moments behind Hollywood's biggest legends. We promise to keep bringing you stories of faith and profound empathy. Clara kept the small gold pen, a physical, tangible reminder of the promise that had saved her son. It was the only proof she had that Marilyn Monroe, the world's most famous star, knew her name. Years passed, not weeks or months, but full healing years in Boston. Tomas thrived. The pioneering neurological program, fully covered by the Silent Trust, did exactly what the specialist promised. His condition stabilized, and through tireless therapy, the 10-year-old boy who could barely stand began to walk. The day Tomas took his first unaided steps across the hospital corridor was the day Clara knew the promise made in the quiet of the night had fully flowered into a miracle. Marilyn and Clara never spoke again, yet the connection remained, sustained by the ongoing silence of the financial trust. On Tomas's birthdays and every Christmas, a small, anonymous package would arrive from a private courier service. Inside, there would be a rare signed first edition of The Little Prince, sent with a simple postmark from a European city, or sometimes just a modest check for his college fund. These gifts were never extravagantly expensive, but they were always personal, reflecting a subtle, continuous care that went far beyond monetary obligation. There was never a return address, never a note, but always the subtle, unspoken confirmation that the angel of the 3 a.m. shift was still watching over them, still on her own mysterious journey. Clara, now working as a successful head nurse at a major Boston facility, never tired of telling Tomas the story of the unnamed angel who had answered their desperate prayer. She made sure Tomas understood that his health and new life were the result of an act of pure, anonymous generosity. The experience fundamentally reshaped Clara's life. The gold pen remained on her nightstand, a constant, silent mentor. She remembered Marilyn's words, that her fame meant nothing unless it was used for good. Quietly, without fanfare, Clara used a portion of her own savings to set up a small, anonymous fund within her new hospital. It was enough to cover a week's rent, a new wheelchair, or specialized tutoring for struggling families. She structured the fund exactly like Marilyn's trust. No names, no recognition, just money appearing exactly when the need was greatest. It was the echo of the promise, her way of ensuring that the good done for her son kept moving forward, multiplying in the quiet corners of the world. The icon of glamour had taught the hard-working nurse that the true measure of a life is not in the size of the spotlight, but in the depth of the shadows you are willing to enter to help another. The story of Marilyn's 3 a.m. hospital visit never made the papers, never earned a headline, and never graced a scandalous tell-all book. It remained a secret held between a world-famous icon, a tired nurse, and the saved boy, a profound, quiet testament to the woman who was finally seen as herself. We live in a world obsessed with celebrity, where every act of kindness is often viewed as a calculated performance for the cameras. But what happened that night was special, because Marilyn Monroe forgot she was Marilyn Monroe. For those few minutes, in the silent, sterile corridor of the Westside Children's Hospital, she wasn't performing. She wasn't playing the role of the glamorous star. She was simply a woman who encountered genuine, necessary struggle and realized that all the fame, all the success, and all the legendary status in the world meant absolutely nothing compared to saving one small boy's future. Marilyn sought happiness in the spotlight and the clamor, but she found her truest purpose in the darkness of the hospital hallway. She had arrived that night desperately seeking a refuge from her own loneliness, an escape from the superficiality of her life. She left with a fierce, quiet mission, a connection to a purpose that went beyond box office numbers. Her simple promise to Clara, delivered with tears streaming down her face, was an act of personal salvation. Clara, the nurse, taught the star a fundamental lesson. Success isn't about how many people know your name. It's about being there for the people who need you most. The greatest irony of that 3 a.m. encounter is that Marilyn Monroe, who was so fiercely protected and controlled by her handlers, found total freedom in this single act of radical selfless giving. The secrecy of the blind trust and the anonymous gifts for Thomas were all designed to keep the purity of the moment intact. She didn't want gratitude, she wanted the feeling of being essential. And in saving Thomas, she finally felt profoundly, beautifully essential. Thomas, who grew up strong and well, knew he had been touched by a kind of guardian angel. He dedicated his life to community health, working with families struggling to afford specialized care, ensuring no one ever felt as invisible as his mother once did. He carried the kindness forward, using his recovery as a beacon for others. His life became the perfect living definition of the gratitude his mother had felt that dark night. His life, filled with purpose and service, was the ultimate living legacy of a Hollywood star's promise. The gold pen, the silent relic of the promise, remained Clara's reminder that the most powerful currency in the world is not wealth, but empathy. Marilyn, the icon, ultimately faded, leaving behind a complex, glittering, often tragic legacy. But for Clara and Thomas, the true Marilyn Monroe was the one who knelt in the dark, her stardom stripped away, realizing that the greatest drama she could ever participate in was the unscripted, real-life miracle of human kindness. She came to a hospital seeking peace. She left having created a life that truly changed everything. That is the true power of a promise kept in the darkness. If this incredible story of secret kindness and genuine human connection touched your heart, please hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell, and don't forget to like this video. We have so many more stories to share about the heroes behind the Hollywood legends.